Hi, I'm Dooma Wendschuh, co-founder and CEO of Province Brands of Canada, and you are listening to Professionally Cannabis.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Hello and welcome to Professionally Cannabis. I'm Johnny Weiser and joining me is my co-host, Oscar Hausman. So, Oscar, who are we speaking to this week?
Well, it's not we because unfortunately I wasn't there.
So I can tell you, we actually interviewed Dooma Wendschuh, who is the founder and CEO of Province Brands of Canada.
So what's the deal with Province Brands?
Well, they make cannabis beer.
What, so beer that tastes like cannabis or cannabis made from beer?
No, so when they brew the beer, they're actually using the full cannabis plant. Instead of barley, they're using cannabis.
So what, it gets you drunk and high?
No, regulations actually stipulate that you can't have alcohol and THC in the same product.
I guess that makes a lot more sense than cannabis made from beer.
In the interview as well, we hear an amazing anecdote about when Dooma first consumed cannabis. You will love it.
Great. Okay, I'm really looking forward to this one, and I hope our listeners are too. Shall we roll the clip?
Let's go.
Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white?
Joining me today is Dooma Wendschuh, co-founder and CEO of Province Brands of Canada. Brewers of Cannabis Beer, they've created a top-quality cannabinoid-derived product as an alternative to alcohol. Welcome, Dooma. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on the show.
A question that we ask to all of our guests when we start our interviews on Professionally Cannabis is, what led you to the plant?
I guess the plant has been part of my life for as long as I can remember. First time I consumed cannabis was actually, if you believe it, on my bar mitzvah. a couple kids took me up to the roof of the hotel and had a joint, and they said, "Now you really become a man." It's a really amazing plant. I see opportunity for it to do wonders for people with certain medical conditions, but more importantly than that, I see it as sort of the lesser of evils when it comes to psychoactives. I have this theory that imagine if our world just didn't have any psychoactive substances, like what kind of a world that would be, where there were no psychoactive pharmaceuticals had ever been invented. There was no illegal drugs like LSD or heroin or crystal meth. There was no alcohol, coffee, or tobacco. And imagine that one day a group of aliens just came out of the sky in their flying saucers and, left behind all of these psychoactive substances that we had never discovered before. I think about this a lot, right? And I imagine like if it was up to the government of the world to try to figure out what do I do with these psychoactive substances, they wouldn't just ban them all, right? They would immediately realize that there are people who for a long time have been suffering from conditions like schizophrenia and depression and ADHD and what have you. And they'd think, oh, look, some of these can treat those conditions. We should make them available on prescription. And of course, they would make certain psychoactive substances available on prescription for people who had medical conditions. And then I think after that first wave, they would say, some of these psychoactive substances might not be that bad and might help people relax after a long day. They might help people connect with each other, form meaningful bonds and friendships and relationships. And, maybe some of them should be legal for anyone who's of a certain age. And I think when they got to that phase, they would say, some of them should be legal at all. Obviously things like heroin, crystal meth, crack cocaine, there's no reason for those to ever be legal for anyone. And they would say those are too dangerous. I think they would say that alcohol would probably be in that group as well, right? They'd probably say that alcohol is too dangerous for everyone to consume if they're of a certain age. It just should be illegal. But I think when it came to marijuana, they'd say, well, this isn't really that bad. That the good that it can bring to an individual, the good it can bring to society outweighs the harms. And I expect that before too long they would legalize cannabis and they would not legalize alcohol. So to me, what drew me to the plant was this desire to help sort of kick that in motion. The world is the way that it is, not because it is the best way that it could be, but because it is the way that it has always been. And I was drawn to the cannabis plant and I got into this industry to help ease or transition the world into the way that it really should be, as opposed to the way it's always has been.
So how did you get into brewing cannabis beer then?
Well, let me tell you, it's been a long, long road. In fact, this is my second cannabis company. The first was a very different idea, although it did turn out to be pretty successful. It was about creating specific tailored sensations for consumers. And I thought that if you did that, you could create something that could be an alternative to alcohol that could give consumers a variety of different sensations. And why be stuck with just one? Alcohol gives you sort of the same sensation every time. It was an interesting approach. I learned a lot. One of the things that I learned was that if you wanted, that company was making primarily vaporizer pens when I was there. If you want to compete with alcohol, you have to create a beverage. People like to consume psychoactives as beverages. And if you look at it, there are 3 legal psychoactives in our world. You've got coffee, tobacco, and alcohol. Mm-hmm. 2 of those 3 are consumed as beverages. The third, nobody does anymore. So it just seemed like we needed to make a beverage that could really be accepted by the mainstream, that they could help cannabis cross into mainstream, and they could really compete on a more level playing field with alcohol. And that was my motivation behind starting Province Brands of Canada. But how we got to brewing cannabis beer, well, that was the original idea. I wanted to make an alcohol-like beverage, and that's all I cared about, that would be powered by cannabis, actually made from the cannabis plant. And I looked around and, I love wine, but like everyone knows, wine has to be made from grapes, right? You can't make whiskey or bourbon from cannabis because there's certain starting materials that those have to be made from. And when it came right down to it, of course, beer could be made from anything. People make beer from millet, from amaranth, from rice. And in the old days, before barley was widespread, they made beer out of just about anything they could find, So it seemed like we could make a beer out of cannabis. Now, what we didn't know is that, I'm not a scientist, and I didn't realize how hard this would be. And the very first thing we did when we founded Province Brands, we flew around, we met with some of the top master brewers from around the world, and we asked them if they could help us. We said we wanted to brew a beer from the cannabis plant, and we were laughed out of the room, honestly, in these meetings. They would say, "What you're talking about is impossible. You can't brew a beer from anything other than grains or some kind of a carbohydrate source." And cannabis is not a carbohydrate, right? Or not a simple carbohydrate like you would find in grains or potatoes. And there's no sugars, right? So there's nothing for the yeast to ferment. And they said that this was just something that couldn't be done. And when we heard that, we did get discouraged, but we kept soldiering on, and we found a team of some of the world's top researchers who are experts in the field of fermentation and things like this, and put together a phenomenal science team. Our team at Province now is 10 scientists, 3 with PhDs, 57 past publications in peer-reviewed journals, and 99 patents that they have received in the past, and set these guys to work. And, we figured out a way to do what everyone said we couldn't do, which was to actually mash and ferment the cannabis plant, and to do that in a way that the psychoactive compounds, the phytocannabinoids, remain in the final beverage and end up just giving you a fantastic psychoactive effect. Of course, when we make our beers from marijuana, we have to remove the alcohol because it is not allowed, and we wouldn't want to, even if it was allowed, to have alcohol and marijuana in the same product. So the intoxicant is the compounds that come from the cannabis plant.
Without giving too many of the trade secrets away, what are the key differences between brewing conventional beer and brewing cannabis beer?
What's interesting is how similar it is, but how hard it is to do what we do, right? Brewing is really simple if you know what you're doing. To brew a beer, you have to start with a carbohydrate source. And then you have to do something called mashing. Mashing is when you convert that carbohydrate source into sugars. And then you feed those sugars to yeast. And the flavor that we know of as a beer is created when the yeast digests the sugars and creates specific esters. These esters are beer flavored. That's just the best way to put it. And then you add the hops at that later stage in the process, and the hops contribute to the flavor of the beverage as well. So we're doing all of that. But what we did that's really unique is that we found a way to take, in fact, the stalks, stems, and roots of the cannabis plant, which are really an underutilized part of the plant. Right? You can't sell them. There's no market for stock stems and roots. You can't easily extract oil from them. I don't know of anyone who knows how to do that. And you can't, in Canada, you can't throw them in the garbage because you don't want people moving through the trash trying to get high, and you sure as hell can't incinerate them because it's marijuana and you could get the whole neighborhood high, right? So this is a part of the plant that is more of a nuisance for most of the growers. And so we're able to use this underutilized part of the plant to create sugar. And without giving away too much, it's a really exciting and interesting field of work that we're in to do this fermentation. When we started going down this path, we thought, this is impossible. No one can do this. And then we actually happened upon the gentleman who became our master brewer at Province Brands. And, he said to me, that's not true. You do this every day. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He's like, well, look, your body functions on glucose, right? I mean, whatever you eat, your body turns it into sugars to give your cells energy and to keep you functioning. And, when you eat plant material, like vegetables and lettuce and stuff like that, your body is able to turn it into sugar so that you can stay alive. When you eat just a salad, you don't die, right? You do actually get nutrition from that. And so if your body can convert this material into sugars, like there must be a way to do it in a lab. And if we can do it in a lab, then for sure there's a way to do it in a brewing setting. And so that is what we did. And now that in and of itself is complicated, but it gets even more complicated when you have to worry about flavor, right? You have to maintain that phenomenal sort of nutty, rich flavor that we get from the cannabis and the beer. You have to worry about oxidation, right? Because oxidation can impact not just your flavor, but your activity of your phytocannabinoids, the psychoactive qualities of the phytocannabinoids. So, across the board, this is a really challenging endeavor that we've embarked on. We've learned a lot over the past 3 years. Honestly, if I had this to do all over again, I'm not sure I would have done it because none of us knew how hard this was going to be when we got into it. I feel like, the scope of the problem that we're solving is sort of akin to something like trying to build a cruise ship or like build an aircraft carrier. I mean, it's immense, it's complex, it requires an insane amount of money, but we are solving that problem. We've made phenomenal beers from the cannabis plant, and now we're figuring out how to make tremendous volumes of those phenomenal beers brewed from the cannabis plant so that we can become the largest beverage company of our kind in the world.
For the cannabis connoisseurs that will be listening to this podcast, can you tell us a little bit about the actual plant that goes into your beer?
Well, it's different every time. In fact, we collect these stalk stems and roots from the growers, and we do require that the material is sorted by strain. So our beverages can be, not all of them are, but they can be strain specific. So you would have certain attributes that are associated with those strains in terms of flavonoid profile, in terms of phytocannabinoid profile, the chemotype in the final beer, which is very interesting. In other cases, we blend certain strains together, but we do that always within the confines of sort of 4 major categories. So our beer might be an indica, it might be a sativa, it might be a hybrid, or it might be a sort of a 50-50 CBD and THC mix. And again, these psychoactive elements, the phytocannabinoids, are coming from the plant itself just through the brewing process, which is what makes our beer really unique and really different than others. So if you're a cannabis connoisseur, you might be used to the terpene profile of a certain strain of cannabis. And right now, if you were to try one of our beers, you would not find that same terpene profile in the beer. And that's largely because the terpenes are very volatile. We are boiling at high temperatures. And so it would have a different taste than what you're used to if you're used to that specific strain. Now, in the future, we are looking at technology, and I think we're actually purchasing technology right now to be able to replicate or to maintain that terpene profile by sort of taking it out of the plant before we start brewing and then reintroducing it towards the end of the brewing process. So that is something that may happen in the future. But for now, it does have a slightly different flavor, but it has a fantastic flavor, and it is a really sort of rich, as I said before, sort of a nutty, savory flavor. It's not made from hemp seeds, our beer at all, but if you've ever had hemp seeds, which are commercially available in many stores, it gives you sort of a sense of what the flavor is of the beer. In fact, it is made from different parts of the plant. It's made from stalk stems and roots of the plant, but it has sort of a kind of almost a toasted hemp seed kind of flavor to it, which I think is just great. And that flavor varies a bit from strain to strain, but it is pretty consistent and pretty awesome. And I think, cannabis connoisseurs, what they want is authenticity. The industry in Canada has changed a lot in recent years. It used to be this small batch sort of craft industry where your grower wouldn't grow a lot of cannabis because he didn't want to end up handcuffed in the back of a police car. And these days, right, the industry's changed. You have a small number of these gigantic licensed producers, and the quality of the product they're churning out, it just doesn't have that authenticity that consumers are clamoring for. And what our beverage has that the others don't have is that it is as authentic as you can get. It is actually made from cannabis. We think of our beverage like the difference between a tang and an orange juice. A beverage that's made from anything else and infused with marijuana is kind of like a tang. Ours is actually made from the cannabis plant itself, from marijuana plant itself, and we think of it like a premium fresh squeezed orange juice. So if you're a cannabis consumer and you crave authenticity, you will find that in our unique brewing process.
And what about for the beer connoisseur? Is this the beer for them? And what beer would you say it's most similar to in type?
Well, I'll answer your second question first and your first question second. In terms of type or style, we can make any type or style with our technology. We don't exactly know how to do that yet. So, for example, we haven't figured out how to make something like a stout, but we know it's possible. It just takes playing around with how much we roast the material before fermentation begins to get those stout-like flavors, and we will do that eventually over time. But in theory and likely in practice, there really isn't a style of beer that we can't recreate using cannabis as a starting material, as opposed to using barley or some kind of grains as that starting material. That's one thing. And then to answer your other question about, would a beer connoisseur like this? Our master brewer says there's different schools of thought when it comes to brewing, right? The German school of thought, he says, is you have a like playing darts, right? You have a bullseye on the wall, and to make a good beer, you have to land it perfectly in the bullseye. The Belgian style of brewing, he says, is like, you just have to hit the wall, right? and the American style of brewing to make a good beer is that the dart just has to leave your hand, and if you've done that, you've succeeded. So, this is not a beer for someone who is really stubborn on the German purity laws of beer. I mean, it does only have 4 ingredients. Typically, if you want to follow those purity laws, a beer should only have 4 ingredients, which is yeast, hops, barley, and water. But we have one ingredient that is different. Ours is cannabis, hops, yeast, and water is what we brew our beer from. And so it's for the adventurous beer drinker. It's for someone who wants to try something new. And I think it also has a mass market appeal because, let's face it, drinking beer is really declining across younger drinkers, across, especially in the developed world. Beer has a lot of calories, but ours does not. We're clocking in at right now 40 and 60 calories for 2 of our products.
Wow.
We expect those to come down to 30 and 50 by the time we go to market. Hopefully we do. I can't guarantee that, but they will come down over time as we perfect our process. It's much lower calorie than a typical beer brewed from barley. It is gluten-free, and nobody likes gluten these days anyway, right? Gluten can cause inflammation even if you don't have celiac disease, and every beer that is made from barley contains gluten. So there's a lot of reasons why someone might want to try this. And then, of course, it has that very unique taste profile, and I'm sure if you're a beer connoisseur, you've been following this rise in popularity of what are called hemp beers. And now hemp beers do not get you high at all. They're not made from hemp, although ours is made from marijuana. They're made from barley, and then they add in hemp as a flavoring later on in the brewing process. So as this style and flavor of beer is growing in popularity, these hemp beers, it shows that people do like a very similar flavor, and the flavor of those hemp beers is not that different from our beers.
How many of these beers does it take for someone to experience a high? And, if you're going to have some of these beers, are you able to, for example, drive a car, drive a tractor? I don't know why you'd be driving a tractor, but
Well, you should never operate any machinery or including motor vehicles under the influence of any psychoactive. I think the best thing to do is if you ever want to consume any psychoactive, including our beverages, is take an Uber. And if you have to drive a tractor, get someone else to drive your tractor for you. In my experience, and the goal for the company is to make it so that you can go 1-for-1 with these beers as you would with a normal beer. So if you're the kind of person that drinks the entire 6-pack while you're watching the sports game, you could probably do that with our beverages. You don't have to drink that much to feel the effect. You start to feel a very slight effect after one beer, and then after 2-3, you feel pretty well. I think it's important to note that if you've never consumed cannabis before, and in particular if you've never consumed edibles and beverages before, your very first time, you might get pretty intoxicated with our product, and that might seem kind of strange, but if you can remember the very first time you drank alcohol, you're probably in high school or junior high or something like that, you probably got pretty drunk, right? And you probably didn't drink that much because, whenever you try any psychoactive for the first time, your body's not used to it, your brain's not used to it. There's a certain time that it takes to get used to the sensations of something new. So I would say, if you haven't tried our beer before, when you do try it, go slow that first time. But after 1 or 2 times and you're used to it, you know what you're getting into, it'll be very mild experience.
And without any alcohol in the beer, would I be right to assume that there's no hangover?
I believe there's no hangover, but I know that there are certain people who do suffer from marijuana hangovers. And if you are one of those people, there are things you can do to reduce your likelihood of getting a marijuana hangover. But that would be from our product just as well as it would be from any marijuana product. And for the vast majority of the population, you can consume this beer without any concern of hangover.
Moving on to the regulatory landscape. So I understand that your beer is considered inedible, which of course becomes legal later this year in Canada. Tell me what it's been like for you guys to navigate the regulatory landscape in Canada and beyond.
Well, it hasn't been easy. I mean, we started this company in 2016 when, in fact, cannabis, edibles, and beverages, there was no indication that they would ever be legal in Canada. And people thought we were crazy. We would go to meetings and people were like, what are you doing? What makes you think, marijuana has been legal in Canada for medical purposes since 2001. What makes you think that we'll ever legalize edibles and beverages? If we wanted to, we would have, that we would have done it by now. We would hear that all the time in meetings. End of the day, we didn't let that deter us. We kept going, and lo and behold, in 2017, they announced that they would allow marijuana, edibles, and beverages in October of 2019. And so it's been sort of this mad dash to October. And it's not just us, right? We've had a lot of company since we were the first to start in the space, but now we've seen Constellation Brands has partnered with Canopy. They're building a 190,000 square foot beverage facility in Smith Falls. They've dropped $5.25 billion. So they're sort of the David in the Goliath, in the industry, and we're kind of the David maybe. We've got AB InBev has partnered with Tilray, and they're building a massive facility to make beverages in Canada. Molson Coors has partnered with Hydropothecary. They're also working on beverages. Just today, we learned that Moosehead had partnered up with Sproutly to make marijuana beverages in Canada. And, there are others in the United States. You've got Heineken partnered with CannaCraft. So, this space is getting crowded very quickly, but it's been really weird because it's been like you are sailing this ship towards a destination, but you don't know where the destination is. And you haven't finished building the ship, and you don't know where the wind is coming from because there have been no rules, there have been no regulations. It's awfully hard to design packaging without any indication of what the regulations are going to be for that packaging, let me tell you. So we're really flying blind here. And in December of 2018, they proposed regulations for edibles and beverages. Now, these were just proposed for comment. We don't know what the final regulations will be like. But a lot of them were quite frankly, likely the kind of things that, more entrenched cannabis companies, those who have been around longer than we have, were lobbying for to sort of protect themselves from competition and really are not in the public's best interest. The example that I think of most comes to mind is that one of the proposed regulations, which came out especially after all these alcohol companies jumped into the industry in Canada, was that they did not want cannabis beverages to have, quote, elements in common with alcohol beverages. And, who knows what that means? Maybe it means they can't have the same brand names. Maybe it means we couldn't call our product a beer. We'll have to wait and see what that means. But at any rate, it's foolish, right? Because for millennia, children have been conditioned not to consume adult beverages, right? You can leave the house for the night and kids are home and have a 6-pack of beer and in the fridge, and for sure when you come home that beer will still be there. Same with the wine and whatever else, tequila. The children know not to drink that sort of stuff. Those sort of beverages that come in those bottles and those shapes with those smells and those flavors, like those are for adults, and it's been imprinted upon them. And by saying that cannabis beverages can't have elements in common with alcohol, you're sort of kind of pushing cannabis beverage makers to make beverages that are maybe sweet, like infused soda pops or infused milkshakes, or the kind of things that kids really like. And, if you go out of the house for the night and you have a 6-pack of grape soda in the fridge and you tell the kids not to drink it, you can't really guarantee that one of them won't be gone by the time you get home. And if they're pushing cannabis beverage companies to make beverages that are, sweeter and with sugar and all this, they're really doing something that's not in the interest of the children of Canada and not in the interest of public health either, because, high sugar beverages are not that good for you. Sugar is not good for you, right? So, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can imagine why the big cannabis companies would lobby for something like this, as they're afraid of competition from these large alcohol companies that have jumped into the space. And it, makes a certain amount of sense why they would lobby for it, but the job of Health Canada is to protect public health and not to protect entrenched business interests. So we hope they'll come around, but we don't know what these final regulations are, and all we can do is wait and see and do our best to lobby as well. But we are a small player in this game right now and don't have the kind of funds to lobby as some of these bigger guys do.
With a number of the big brands coming into the space, how important is your first mover advantage going to be?
I think it's incredibly important. We have been at this since 2016. We have a good 2.5 year head start. And one of the things that's really made this first mover advantage clear is that we have been approached now 9 times, and we're working on our 10th right now, by other companies to co-pack for them in our facility. And we will have one of the few, maybe the only brewery in Canada and thus in the world that is licensed on a federal level to brew a beer and either infuse it with marijuana if our customers want us to do that, although that's not our primary business for our own products, or actually brew the beer out of marijuana or cannabis.
Tell us a little bit about the team behind Province Brands of Canada. You mentioned that cumulatively there are 99 patents that's still in the team. You must have some great minds there.
We do, and it is really, we are a science-driven company, and we focus our energies on recruiting sort of the best and brightest, not just in Toronto, not just in Canada, but really from around the world. And our team of scientists at Province Brands, there are 10 scientists we have on board, 3 with PhDs. They have published in the past 57 publications in peer-reviewed journals, and we encourage them to continue to publish the research that they are now doing for Province Brands, and we're working on some publications right now. And with their help, we have applied for patents around not just the process of brewing the world's first beers brewed from the cannabis plant, but importantly and uniquely, also patents around the formulation of the world's first beers brewed from the cannabis plant. And, the way this works, when you apply for patents, you make a bunch of claims. There's no guarantee that the patents will be approved at all, or if they will, that all the claims will be approved. But we're very, very hopeful and very confident, actually, that we will be successful in receiving these formulation style of patents, because we can pattern them after a small number of other patents which have been granted to mostly Japanese and in one case Chinese beer company for making beers out of really unusual starting materials. In one case, a Japanese company figured out a way to brew a beer actually from soybeans. And, our patent is very similar to theirs. And, I can tell you it is much harder and much less obvious and much more innovative to be able to brew a beer from the plant material, the cannabis plant material, than it is to brew a beer from soybeans, which do have free carbohydrates, right? So, we're quite confident that if those other folks were able to receive these style of patents, we would be able to receive those as well. And if it had to go into adjudication and there was some disagreement, we think we'd have a very strong case, as to why we should receive this patent. So we're really confident and we're really excited. And if we do receive the patents as we plan, we will own this entire category of beverage, whether it is brewed from marijuana or hemp, because we could make our beverage just as easily from hemp, whether it contains alcohol, right? If we make the beverage from alcohol, if we make the beverage from hemp, it could contain alcohol, or whether it is alcohol-free, as most of our products are, and intoxicates using marijuana or its phytocannabinoids.
Now, if you are granted a patent, as you hope to be, would I be right in imagining that a part of the business will move into sort of contract filling and white label products for other businesses?
Well, you don't need to have a patent to do that. So in fact, we are already doing that in a very small way. One of the co-packing deals we made is sort of a two-way deal. So we're co-packing a beer for this client who wants us to make a marijuana product for them. And then we're going to process hemp using our technology and our process and sell them sugars made from the hemp plant, which they can then use to make their own beer that would contain alcohol. And they can do that at their own brewery. So that's really exciting. And that's just the beginning. We hope to close many more deals like this. And we hope to license out several of our technologies, not just the technology around the way that we brew the beer, but also technologies around the onset and offset of the beer and other things that we're developing in the future. So yes, it's a very simple game. We are at our core, we're an innovation company, we're a research and development company. We are a platform company, and the platform that we're creating is all around the best ways to make premium beverages from cannabis, and we intend to license a lot of the technology that we are developing as we continue to move forward.
For folks that might be listening that live across Europe, be it Belgium, France, Germany, the UK, and anywhere else, when can people expect to see your beers on their shelves? Well,
it could be a while. Right now the marijuana beverages are really only legal in certain jurisdictions. Most of Europe, it does not seem like they would be allowed for medical patients, although there may be some jurisdictions where they could be allowed. In particular, it seems like we might be able to sell them to medical patients in the United Kingdom. It's an unusual way to take your medicine, to drink it as a beer. But I think if there's any group of people in the world who would appreciate and understand that, it is the British. So we're very hopeful that we can figure out how to launch in the UK for medical. And then, a lot of countries around Europe are getting closer to legalizing, recreational cannabis. We believe that Malta may legalize soon. It looks like Italy and Greece are sort of close to legalizing it, and there may be others. So once the product becomes legal in a recreational way, it becomes very easy for us to get our product into your country, and you're very likely to see it around that time.
And in terms of the business itself, do you have any boots on the ground in Europe as it stands? And what's your sort of market entry strategy, if you have one at the moment?
So we've been tracking the market in Greece very closely. One of our advisors, members of our advisory board, is living in Greece and is helping us with that licensure process. And we're really excited. We've identified even a brewery there that could be of interest. So we are likely to enter in the market in Greece, although the other country of interest for us now is Luxembourg, which has legalized recreational cannabis, becoming the first country in Europe to do so. It is a small market, and it is sort of a relatively high cost of production market. But we could end up doing something in Luxembourg as well.
If I were to ask you to make a left field prediction about something you see happening relatively soon in the cannabis space, what would it be?
I think we're going to be seeing very soon many more countries legalizing recreational cannabis. Folks have been watching Canada, and they've seen that the sky has not fallen. They've seen that Canada is generating substantial tax revenue. They see that the United Nations has not declared war on Canada, and neither has anyone else. So, once countries see that there really are no repercussions for allowing recreational cannabis for adults, it seems like it's going to spiral very, very quickly. And it's one of these things that takes a really long time and a lot of social engineering and a lot of movement to even get one country to fall. But once one falls, the others start to fall very quickly. We now have 3 countries in the world where marijuana is legal recreationally: Luxembourg, Uruguay, and Canada. I forecast by this time next year there'll be 3 more for a total of 6.
You mentioned Greece and Italy before, close to legalizing marijuana. What other country do you think is around the corner from making a similar move?
For recreational, I think Malta. I mean, there are a lot of people talk about Malta, and I think some of the Mediterranean countries, that have had medical for a long time and haven't seen negative impacts from their medical marijuana programs, are likely to allow recreational cannabis to be legal. So we'll see. We'll see. It's a great way for these countries to generate tax revenue. It's a great way for them to reduce the cost of their healthcare. In Europe, a lot of countries pay for the healthcare of citizens, unlike in the United States. And, alcohol brings a lot of people to the hospital. And if you have marijuana legalized, you reduce the amount of alcohol that the population is consuming. And so you reduce their number of hospital visits, right? So there's a lot of reasons why this should happen. We're just waiting for people to wake up and see that it's worked in Canada and hopefully legalize it in their jurisdiction as well.
Having run Province Brands of Canada for 3 years now, since 2016, in cannabis years, that makes you a veteran. I'm sure you've had a number of war stories, and I'm sure there's been a lot of hiccups across the way. For folks that are looking to get into the cannabis space, be it beverages or not, what experiences that you've had would you pass on to them?
This is a very unique industry with a lot of opportunity and also a lot of things to watch out for. Because of the rapid growth of this industry, and because, of course, it's the drugs business, you end up with a lot of unsavory characters attracted to the industry. I would say if you're looking to get into the space, you should be very, very careful who you partner with, who you accept investment from, who you hire. I mean, it is a minefield, this industry, and cannabis consumers have a reputation for being pretty easygoing, laid back, in a good mood, and it's easy to expect that those in this industry would behave in that way, and they really don't. I think this is a very cutthroat and dog-eat-dog industry, more so than tech, more so than most others. When you get into this business, you're going to war, and you better be ready to go to war, and you better be ready to watch your back and to do everything you would do in a combat situation, because this is not, it's not that different. But if you can make it through, if you can plan strategically, if you can build a phenomenal business, the opportunity is beyond compare. I mean, if you look at the wealth that has been generated in cannabis, it's unlike any other industry that we've seen in modern times. It's just off the charts, especially for an industry that deals in physical goods. I mean, it's phenomenal. And you can generate substantial wealth while at the same time doing something great for the world and for folks who have medical conditions where cannabis can help them, and for folks who might otherwise be using alcohol.
And the clock's beating us somewhat. Dooma, any final takeaways?
I really love what we are doing at Province, and I love making this beer, and I hope that when others try it, they can taste what we're putting into it. This has been a 3-year labor of love, and we've done something that everybody said was impossible. And there are a lot of days when I wake up and it still feels impossible, but we've done it now. And that's something I'm really proud of. And I'm really excited to bring this product to market. I hope if any of your listeners are in Canada, or if they're traveling to Canada soon, they'll give it a try when it hits stores, either in October, or if the government delays the launch of beverages, whenever they allow the launch of beverages, it'll be ready.
And I will say, you have inspired me. When it comes round to my son's bar mitzvah, I might just well give him a sip of Provence beer.
I hope so. Maybe we can make up like a pot cottage or something.
Dooma, you've been great. Thanks for joining us on Professionally Cannabis.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Where do they go? The smoke rings I blow each night. Oh, what do they do? Those circles of blue and white.
Well, that interview was a bit of a doozy. I wish I'd been there for that one.
And listeners, if you liked my solo dulcet tones, feel free to like, subscribe, and if we get enough shares, Oscar, you're fired.
See you next Tuesday, Johnny.
Glad we got that in.